أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. نوينا نتعلم وتعليم وتذكر وتذكير ونفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم والدعاء إلى الهدى والدلالة على الخير ابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته وثوابه وقربه سبحانه وتعالى. So Imam al-Haddad radiallahu ta'ala anhu nafa'na bih, he says in his seventh chapter on the acquisition of knowledge, he says you should have a wird of reading useful knowledge, which is that which increases your knowledge of the essence of Allah, His attributes, acts, and favors, makes you aware of His commands and prohibitions, leads you to renounce the things of this world and wish only for the hereafter, and brings your faults, the defects in your acts, and the plots of your enemy to your notice. The Prophet ﷺ said, طَلَبَ الْعِلْمِ فَرِيدَةٌ عَلَى كُلِّ Muslim. He said, seeking knowledge is an obligation upon every Muslim. What he meant by this is the seeking of what is obligatory for every Muslim to know, your fara'id al-ayn, which is essentially what is halal, what is haram, and the obligatory things you need to know in order to the obligatory things you need to know about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the obligatory things you need to know in order to practice your religion, i.e., how to do wudu, how to do salah, how to pay zakat, how to fast during the month of Ramadan, how to do hajj if it becomes obligatory upon you, etc. There are certain obligatory things that one has to know in order to live their life as a Muslim. And these things have been made obligatory upon every single Muslim to know. So the Prophet ﷺ, he says, طَلَبَ الْعِلْمِ فَرِيدَةٌ عَلَى كُلِّ Muslim. Seeking knowledge is an obligation because intrinsically within this religion is a divine knowledge. And so when one has proclaimed the testimony of faith, ultimately what they're doing is that they are proclaiming an understanding or an appreciation or an observance of divine knowledge. And that comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah Jalla sha'nuhu, the ultimate knowledge is what? Is knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is called ma'rifah. Ma'rifah is ultimately to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is the pinnacle of knowledge. And so when one proclaims the testimonies of faith, what they have essentially done is that they have taken something of that ma'rifah because they have come to know something of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and accepted Him as their Lord. And so Imam al-Haddad, he's recommending that one should have a wird of reading useful knowledge. Right? Because knowledge is vast and it's abundant, but not all of it can be useful. There may be things that are not useful to someone to know. For example, if someone doesn't even know how to perform wudu properly, and then they're looking at what the rulings of transactions are, then they've got their priorities muddled up. It's not useful for them to know the legalities of transaction or transactional law when they don't even know how to purify themselves in order to approach the prayer, which is the foundation. So one should have a wird of reading useful knowledge, and that grows, right? Certain things become useful as your acquisition of knowledge grows. And what is ultimately useful knowledge? It's that which increases your knowledge of the essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His attributes, acts, and favors, and makes you aware of His commands and prohibitions. So the first essential point of what is useful from knowledge is that it reminds you of Allah and it tells you and it teaches you about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So anything that brings that within your heart or increases that knowledge of the essential, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that becomes something beneficial. And that is ilm nafi'. That is knowledge that is beneficial and that leads to benefit. And then the knowledge which leads you to renounce the things of this world and wish only for the hereafter, and brings your faults, the defects in your acts, and the plots of your enemy to your notice. So then the knowledge which leads you to renounce the dunya and that which is within it, i.e., the things that are distractions. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in multitudes within the Quran, He says, وَمَا هَذِهِ الْحَيَاةُ الدُّنْيَا إِلَّا لَهْوٌ وَلَعِبٌ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says, وَمَا هَذِهِ الْحَيَاةُ الدُّنْيَا إِلَّا مَتَاعُ الْغُرُورِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in multiple places within the Quran in different kind of ways, He says that the life of this world is nothing but a plaything and a pastime. He also says subhanahu wa ta'ala that what is this life, what is this worldly life except the comfort of illusion, right? So this what there are things that are worldly that are there, they exist, seek simply to distract you from Allah Jalla Sha'nuhu. And so those are things that you should renounce. And knowledge which increases you in your ability to renounce those things is beneficial knowledge ultimately, right? Because they allow you to wish only for the hereafter, because what is within the hereafter, that is your meeting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then it brings to account or brings to attention your faults, the defects in your acts, and the plots of your enemy, right? Your enemy is not just simply, you might think that the people who are damaging to your religion are your enemy, but rather there is a thing within yourself which is ultimately the most damaging to your religion, and that is your ego, that is your nafs. And nafs al-lawama is the lower self. It's the thing that is most damaging to your religion, more so than people and people around you and things that they may say and things you may hear or see. It's your own fault. It's your own base desires, which ultimately are uh, they're the thing that they're the catalyst that allows you to um, uh, lend your ears to things that are impermissible to hear, or lend your eyes to things that are impermissible to see, or lend your hands to things that are impermissible to touch or acquire. Right? So the enemy, the plots of your enemy are already within you. And knowledge is that which brings that to your attention so that you may combat that. Right? And that is what this science in particular, the science of tasawwuf, the science of al-ihsan, this is what this science seeks um, to remedy, right? And this science teaches you how to deal with those issues. Imam al-Haddad continues and he says, this knowledge is present in the Quran, the Sunnah, and the writings of the leaders, i.e., the Imams. So the essential knowledges or sciences that one should be seeking to understand and to learn and to internalize, they exist within the Quran, the Sunnah, and then the books or the works of the Imams of the Salaf. It was collected by al-Imam al-Ghazali in his highly valuable books. Those who have religious perspicacity are well steeped in knowledge and have complete certitude and those who have complete certitude have great esteem for his books. If you wish to travel the path and arrive at the levels of realization, you must make it a habit to read them. The Ghazalian books are unique among the writings of the correct Sufis in that they are comprehensive, explicit, and greatly effective within a short time. So, like we said in the first session, that um, Imam al-Ghazali um, uh, really inspires Imam al-Haddad's sort of methodology and his sort of understanding of tasawwuf and just to be honest, generally his sort of methodological approach towards Din al-Islam. So it's no wonder that he's in his seventh chapter on acquiring knowledge that he places this sort of emphasis for anyone who wishes to seek knowledge that they should be engaging in the works of Imam al-Ghazali because they hold such great importance. His Ihya Ulumuddin, his magnum opus, is I mean literally its title means the revival of religious sciences. It's the revival of the sciences of this religion. And so what those works seek to do within the reader of those works is revive within them the understanding, the correct and sound understanding of the religion and their attachment to the religion. Because it's very, very possible for someone to have studied many, many years and to have acquired heaps of knowledge and yet be distant from the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is ultimately because, يَهْدِي مَن يَشَاءُ وَيُضِلُّ مَن يَشَاءُ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He guides whom He wills and He misguides whom He wills. And ultimately, so that guidance comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But at the same time, it can be that a person takes all this knowledge onto their shoulders and does not internalize it. There's a story of Al-Imam al-Ghazali, which is one of his sort of transformative points is when he's traveling, and he spent all these years sort of studying and gathering knowledge and learning in the corners of the world, and he's traveling and he's met by some bandits, some highwaymen, some robbers, and they take everything. And Imam al-Ghazali, he says to the leader of the bandits that you can take whatever you want, but leave my notes, because this is the culmination of my acquisition of knowledge. This is my knowledge in here, all of my notes over all these years of me having studied. And the bandit, he says to Imam al-Ghazali, he says, then how weak is your knowledge that it's if I burn these few papers, then your knowledge is just gone. That's it. Everything that you have is just gone in just a few papers. And this really resonated with Imam al-Ghazali, and what it did was it caused him to pursue the path of memorization, in which he memorized now everything that he learned, which is a great feat in of itself. But then considering exactly what was within, the amount of knowledge that he retained and that he transmitted, it's truly remarkable. In all of the sciences, really, in the sciences of fiqh, in usul, in aqidah, in kalam, in tasawwuf, in hadith, uh, he was truly remarkable as a scholar. And to consider that this was all things that he retained within himself, and he stopped relying upon anything written, you know. But such is the great scholars of the path, and this is why Imam al-Ghazali's works are so profound and so important for anyone who seeks to acquire something of knowledge to study. And he includes within the Ihya, there's multiple works that are sort of within the Ihya, and it consists of multiple chapters that cover a range of sciences, and most of the sciences that need to be discussed have been discussed by Imam al-Ghazali. So Imam al-Haddad, he continues and he says, you must read extensively in books of hadith and tafsir and those of the people in general. For this is where a comprehensive opening and perfect traveling are to be found, as a Gnostic once said. So when he says the people, he means the qawm. So in different instances, this refers to different things. So it can at times refer to if someone from the tradition that Imam al-Haddad is speaking from, the Ba'alawi tradition, when he refers to the people, it can mean that he's talking about the masters of Bani Alawi, of that specific tradition. But generally speaking, in works like this, which are works of tasawwuf, it refers to the mutasawwifin, i.e., the Sufis of the past, the true Sufis of the past. Imam al-Qushayri in his Risala, he refers to them as well in the same manner. He refers to them as the people, and he refers to the knowledge of the people, etc. And so he says that you must read extensively in the books of hadith and tafsir and those of the people in general. Right. So you should read extensively the works of hadith and the explanatory works of hadith which exist, like Fath al-Bari, for example, a great commentary, that one of the greatest commentaries on Sahih al-Bukhari is composed by Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. It's called Fath al-Bari, or al-Minhaj, um, which is a commentary on Sahih Muslim by al-Imam al-Nawawi. And so on and so forth. There are multitudes of, for example, Mullah Ali al-Qari, who is a very notable and important scholar within the Hanafi tradition. He has a commentary on the Muwatta, but the Muwatta that's been narrated by Imam al-Shaybani, not the Muwatta that's the common Muwatta that the Malikis use, but rather the Muwatta that the Hanafis use. على كل حال, the point being that you should read extensively in the books of hadith, and especially the explanatory works that exist around them, and the tafasir as well, of course. And we mentioned this yesterday, the importance of when you're reading the Quran and when you're engaging with the Quran, it shouldn't just be at a surface level thing. There should be some reflection and some engagement with it. And so whether you know Arabic or you don't know Arabic, tafsir is extremely important in order to gain a further understanding into these verses and the meanings behind them and the subtleties that exist within the kalam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then the works of the people, as we touched on, the works of the mutasawwifin, because these are works in which the sciences of the heart are transmitted and explained. And these are extremely important for the everyday average Muslim, every Muslim at any whatever level they are at, whether they are a complete beginner, i.e., a person who has just become a Muslim, to someone who has been seeking knowledge and who is um, from the higher echelons of our scholarly tradition. It's important for all of them to engage within the sciences of the heart and the principles that exist with therein, because it's a thing that affects everyone, always, constantly, right? And this is what it means to have a wird, right? That is constant, it's something constant. And so these are things that someone should be conscious of constantly. However, you must be wary of whatever their treatises include by way of obscure matters and bare realities. These are present in most of the writings of Sheikh Muhyiddin ibn al-Arabi and a few of the works of Imam al-Ghazali, such as al-Mi'raj and al-Madnoon bih. Um, Sidi Ahmed Zarruq gave in his Ta'sis al-Qawa'id a warning about such books, which you can read if you wish, but did not mention the writings of Sheikh Abdul Karim al-Jili, for he was a latecomer. However, all of his writings should, for the sake of safety, be avoided. So, one thing to be clear here is that when Imam al-Haddad is talking about, for example, some of these works of Sheikh al-Akbar ibn Arabi and some of these works of Imam al-Ghazali and so on and so forth, and al-Jili, he means for the generality of people. For example, if you have someone who has never ever read a introductory, a primary text within Tasawwuf, and then they come and they want to read Futuhat al-Makkiyah by Ibn Arabi and things like this, then they're bound for problems, because they're good, because what will be discussed are realities and situations and sciences and principles that are far beyond their understanding. And so it's more than likely that they will get confused, and they will, in lots of cases, in fact, they may even lose their religion, or at the bare minimum they may misunderstand these concepts and apply them incorrectly. For example, there are concepts that are discussed in these sort of higher works of tasawwuf, such as some principles. We won't go into them, but there are certain concepts that are mentioned, and if one has not had the proper training and has does not have a proper reading in these sciences, it's very easy for them to become confused and then to try to misapply these things, which happens. Which is why that, for example, the works of Tasawwuf, they're so misunderstood. You have people who are not even Muslim who engage with these works, and then they proclaim that they are Sufis. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. We mentioned what Sidi Ahmed Zarruq says, that there is no tasawwuf without fiqh, and there's no fiqh without tasawwuf, and there's neither of these two things without iman. So how can someone claim this title and they don't even believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? They don't even believe in the risala of Sayyidina Rasulullah alayhi afdal salatu wassalam. I mean, it's extremely problematic to say the least. So I mean, one should be cautious, especially towards the beginning. This doesn't mean that Imam al-Haddad or even the Sada of Bani Alawi were against the works of Ibn Arabi, because as we'll see later on within this same book, he does quote Ibn Arabi. So it's evident that he did read the works of Ibn Arabi and others. It's just that the advice here is to, especially for a beginner of the path, or the generality of people. Because remember, this is being written and sort of being addressed to the common Muslim, that they don't need to go into these things. It's not relevant for them, and so it's better for them not to, right? So Imam al-Haddad then he continues and he says, should it be said, there is no harm in reading such books, for I take that which I understand and leave alone that which I do not. I would say you speak fairly. However, what we fear for you is that which you think you understand, but rather you understand it incorrectly and thereby diverge from the straight path, as has happened to some who were assiduous readers of those books and ended up in heresy and disbelief, and talked about hulul, incarnation, and union, ittihad. There is neither. Naam. So, I mean, This is a principle that it's first and foremost, when someone comes to you and says there is no harm in reading such books, for I take that which I understand and leave alone that which I do not. The problem with this is that how do you even know what you've understood correctly? How do you even know? This is very indicative of the nafs speaking rather than, someone speaking from sound intention and, with sound basis. This is the nafs. I take what I understand and I just leave that everything that I don't understand. You don't even know if you've understood what you've understood with the correct understanding, i.e., you don't know if your understanding is sound in any way, shape, or form, you know? So what you're saying is you're not fooling anyone other than yourself. And this is what Imam al-Haddad is saying. What we fear for you is that which you think you understand, but rather you understand it incorrectly and thereby diverge from the straight path, right? So you think that you understand these sort of concepts of, I mean, even something as simple as fana fillah, or something as simple, I mean, these, it's not simple, so to speak, but I mean, like the basic understanding of it, the basic comprehension of what the concept is something generally basic. But the point being that someone may read into this whilst not having ever sort of read any works of tasawwuf, and then they say that they understand, but they present a sort of a completely false understanding of these concepts and issues. I mean, you have this with people who, um, some of our some of our friends who are um, sort of from this tradition or from the wider Sunni corpus. They proclaim to, they speak against tasawwuf as a science, which is very, it's interesting. It's intriguing to me that someone would speak against a science, against a knowledge which is found very soundly within our learning tradition, our scholastic tradition, and within our primary sources. But I diverge. I digress rather. The point being that you'll see these people and they'll start talking about these concepts, some of these sort of higher knowledges and things like that, and higher sciences, and they're speaking completely out of turn because they're presenting them in a way that they've understood them, but they've understood them in the wrong way because they've never properly gone through a course of study in which they've um, read with a teacher any of these works, or at least come or ask the questions to the people who know these answers. They've just, you know, heard these terms through other sort of lenses and other filters and negative filters and things like that. And then they present them and say, like, this is crazy. Look, these people do this and do that. And I mean, for example, I saw recently, people were debating the concept of raqs. Raqs is a form of movement within dhikr, within remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they're saying, this is, crazy, and these Sufis do this, XYZ. SubhanAllah, this is a fiqh debate. This is not a matter of shirk or aqidah or whatever. It's fiqh. It's either permissible according to legal principles or it's impermissible according to legal principles, you know? And yes, there are things that inform legal principles, and that there's ways in which legal principles are sort of changed and understood in different contexts. But the fact of the matter is that it's an issue of legality. It's not an issue of theology. It's not an issue of this is a Sufi thing, quote unquote. It just shows a sort of uh, lacking in understanding our wider Sunni corpus and our wider scholastic tradition. And it's a shame, really. But this is what Imam al-Haddad is indicating, that you are speaking, you think you understand, but you've understood incorrectly, and now because of that, you're diverging from the straight path. And this is what happens to lots of people who, like for example, and on the flip side, then you have people like, for example, Idris Shah, who's sort of writing. at the turn of the century, and he's writing books like the Sufis and works of the Tasawwuf and things like this. And the issues that he presents is that he presents a form of Tasawwuf that is divorced from al-Islam and from a sound sort of principled worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then you see within the 60s and the 70s, you see like the advent of individuals who go to like North Africa or the subcontinent, etc. And then they have practices of tasawwuf which are contrary to what we have understood from within the tradition. Anyone who has sort of had a sort of traditional education or has been surrounded by traditional circles of knowledge and understanding, they will know that they will find these concepts alien. They're completely alien to them. So there's people who may delve into these sciences in the wrong way, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for safety and security. You know, Imam al-Haddad, he finishes this chapter by saying there is neither ability nor power save by Allah the High, the Formidable, because all knowledge comes from Him subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He gives to whom He wills and He takes from whom He wills. And that may be the sound understanding, it may be a understanding, or it may be the greatest understanding. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to gain something of knowledge and to instill within ourselves some wird of knowledge. One thing I'll say, actually, there are times of the day in which it's recommended to seek knowledge. So this time of the day, this is the late afternoon prior to the entrance of Salat al-Maghrib, prior to the sunset. It's traditional that they would have circles of knowledge in which sciences of the heart are discussed, and this is called a roha. And so in these times, certain sciences will be discussed. And then there's other times during the day, such as the early morning. So following the Fajr prayer, where the sciences are discussed and certain books are read, it's advisable for knowledge to be acquired during the early morning period also, because this is when the mind is sort of fresh. You know, you've done your wudu, you've done your salah, you're kind of awake and sort of your mind is more active, and so in those moments it's advisable to seek knowledge within those early periods of the day as well. And so remember, the whole point of these next few chapters is the wird of doing these things. And so we've discussed sort of knowledge as a whole, but we should be conscious of maintaining an active sort of wird of having knowledge and seeking knowledge and learning and studying, even if it's, you know, for 30 minutes throughout our days. And so, you know, part of the sort of logic behind having these sort of sessions and having them like between 30 to 45 minutes is so that at least we maintain this wird, this active sort of seeking of knowledge every single day, at least during the month of Ramadan. And then inshallah ta'ala, the hope is that following Ramadan, that every single, and you know, the wird of seeking knowledge, maybe it's once a week, right? Maybe it's once a week, depending on someone's sort of tartib and their sort of schedule and what they can and can't give. Perhaps it may be that once a week, you know, they spend half an hour or an hour studying, reading something. Now, obviously, the most essential is to start with the fara'id al-ayn, the things that are obligatory for you to know, as we mentioned earlier, and then to build upon that. Right. But, you know, life is a constant pursuit of knowledge because knowledge is ultimately of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so when we say that life is a consistent or constant pursuit of knowledge, it means that life is a constant pursuit of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and seeking to know Him Jalla Jalaluhu. And so we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to benefit us with beneficial knowledge and to increase us in beneficial knowledge and increase us by that knowledge of closeness to Him subhanahu wa ta'ala and to His Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for safety and security from um, coming ahead of ourselves and trying to seek things before learning the basics. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to increase us in all khair and goodness. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for success. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Jazakumullahu khair. Inshallah ta'ala, we'll continue tomorrow with the next chapter at the same time, inshallah ta'ala. And inshallah, we'll leave you in the care of Allah. If there's any questions, as always, we can send them. If not, then inshallah, we'll continue tomorrow. Jazakumullahu khaira. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.